Okay, welcome back to the third video of Simple Interest Calculator. Now the first thing we're going to do here is to ensure that we rename all these our tools so that when we go into the coding environment, whatever tool we are using will give us a better name for us to understand and to navigate properly. Now how are you going to take care of that using the name control? The name controls. So what I do now is when you click on, for instance, Simple Interest, instead of using button 1, you're going to use BTN and then probably interest, or let's do that like this, BTN interest. Then the same thing happens to principal rate, durations, and every other parameters we're using right here so that will not complicate issues when you go into the coding environment. Let's do that right now. The same thing is applicable to our text boxes. We're going to call this TXT and then interest. Alright, that's all we need for now. We are heading straight up to our coding environment. We're going to start with the interest per se. Let's start with interest. Okay, so double click on interest. It takes us to the interest button, BTN interest underscore click. Okay, here. What exactly will this interest perform whenever we click on it? The first thing the interest will do is to ensure that it changes its input log from please select an option below to interest selected, something like that. Let's just implement that. Okay, now once we click our interest, your lbl.log.text should now display interest selected. Okay, now that means each time you click on simple interest, it should change here to what interest has been selected. Now the second thing we need to do is that actually in the right pane here, your result pane, your interest should not allow input from users because that's where your result is going to come from. Only the principal, the rate, and the year should be left open. So what I'm going to do now is go there and then our interest, that's txt interest, should remain read only. Okay, our txt interest read only will be true. That means that if I run this program and click on interest, your interest field will not allow users input from users. Let's try it and see what happens. Alright, so there's a program. Now let's see if that's gonna work. We click on interest, wow, interest selected, and then you realize that our interest field has been labeled read only. Now that means no values can be inputted here, but you can input values here. We can input values here, we can input values here, then click on compute. So the next thing we want to do now is to write a code to give us our interest result when compute is selected. So let's do that right now. We go back to, this time around I'm going to use the compute environment to do that. You double click on that. Okay, now there's something we can actually use what they call a private sub, so we can call it, let's call this private sub interest. Okay, in the private sub interest, remember the simple interest is simply principal times all over 100. So that's going to be that your txt interest.text, that the value of the txt interest.text will be equal to the principal txt principal.text, whatever you input there, multiplied by txt rect.text, and then multiply again by txt what do you call it, year.text. Okay, now everything should be divided by 100, so we will use precedence. Let's open a bracket here and then you close it with the brackets, then you divide everything by 100. That is just all. So we now go to compute button and then call the sub interest. Alright, so let's see if that really works. We're going to do something else. All right, here is it. So we choose our interests, then our principal, let's call it 20,000. Our rates, let's call it like 2%, and our year, let's say our year is 1.5. Then we click compute. All right, we have 600 as our interest. Okay, that was pretty cool. Let's move up to something else. All right, now even though we've written the code to implement these, and then we can click interest and then compute, it gives us a result, the interest result. Now, do you think this interest really works? Let's look at that. Principal, let's say I got 2,000, and then rate I have like 1.5%, and then my year is 2 years. I click compute, I still have my result. That means this interest is not working. So we have to write a code that will tell the compiler, before you compute anything here, first check what the user's option looks like. So let's write a program to implement that. Okay. All right, let's go back to our coding environment. Now we'll come to this our compute button. So we'll use an if statement. We now say if txt interest dot read only is equal to true, then only will you calculate for interest. And if. Now this means that if only the interest value is true, or read only is true, which means that, remember that once I click interest, here is gonna change to what, read only. So that simply tells the compiler that I've clicked something. So if only this read only is activated, then compute. Sorry about otherwise, do not compute anything. Ask the user to check for an option. We're going to write that program later on, but let's finish with this one. So let's run and see what that happens, or what that does for us. Okay, right now we have the program. Let's have our principal 2,000 again, and then let's have our rate to be 2. Let's have our year to be anything, 3. Compute. Oh, nothing is working. That's because we've not selected any option here. So now let's click on interest and then click compute again. We have a result. That's a simple way to implement that. However, there are many ways that can be done. There are so many ways, but that I think is one of the simplest methods to implement such commands. Let's move further to something else. Okay, the next thing we will wish to do is to give a condition here to validate this very cell, this input. Because if you want to calculate for simple interest, that means you must have principal, you must have rate, and you must have duration. So what if a user chooses to probably put the input, the principal, the rate, and there is no year, and then still go ahead to press compute? It's not going to work. It's going to crash the program. So let's write a condition that these 3 fields must be imputed before you compute for interest. Remember, we're still working on interest for now. So let's go to the form environment. Now we're going to write that under this interest. So we go to where we had our private sub for the interest here. Now we now give a condition that if, let's say, if our txt principal is equal to empty, that's if the field, sorry, you have to put dot text. Dot text is empty, or txt rate, because rate must be there, dot text is also empty, or txt and year dot text is also empty. Then tell the user message box show input fields cannot be empty. Message field, input field rather, cannot be empty, except that else any of them is active, then you can now give us a result. Alright, now let's see what that does for us. Let's run the program and see what happens. Okay, we have it right here. Now let's choose our interests and then click on principal. Probably let's have something like 2500 and then click on compute. Whoa, input fields cannot be empty. So that means you must input your rate and then you must input your year and then compute before it works. Otherwise, probably delete this. It's gonna tell you input fields cannot be empty. That's pretty cool. Now let's look at something else. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at right now is this. Now, assuming that you did not click, probably did not select the interests, nothing was selected here, and then you click compare. Remember what happened? It's not going to calculate anything. But then you should prompt the user that, please, select an option. So let's work on that. Okay, I believe you probably might have think, how are we going to do that? That's very simple also. Exactly what you've done here, we can implement the same strategy to complete that problem. Now, remember that in this simple form, before you can compute anything, you must select either the interest, which means this is going to be rendered read only, or we select the principal, that means principal is going to be rendered read only, the same thing with rate and the same thing with duration. So we can use that concept to write a program for this compute button. So what we're going to do now is very simple. Let's go to the compute button. Here is it. So what you will say is, now if before this statement, let's delete this first, or let's just put it above this. All right, now we're going to say if txt interests dot read only now is not equal to true, that means that very one is not true, or the txt principal dot read only is not equal to true. Now if they're not equal to true, then message box dot show tell the user, please select an option. Otherwise, but else if you're going to leave this one out of here. Else if txt interest dot read only is equal to true, then call interest. We're going to do the same thing for rate, time, and principal when you go to that very part, but let's just complete it one after the other so you understand. Let's run this program and see what happens then. Okay, here's the program. Let's see what happened now. Okay, let me have here 22. Let me have something here and then click compute. Wow, please select an option. You must actually select what? An option before something can be done here. Alright, so we come here and then click interest and then complete our field. Let's click compute again. It said no, please select an option. And there's a problem here. What's the problem? We've actually selected an option, okay, but the values are not complete. Yet it's telling us to select an option again. Let's complete the value and see what happens. Compute, please select an option. No. There's a problem. Oh, well, when you run into such problems, it's common in programming. You have to encounter issues like that, and you just need to debug, that's all. Just need to debug. Now let's look at the problem again because it's coming from here actually. So the program says if text interest read only is not true and this is not true and this is not true, then write the message, please select an option. Then before it checks for the next one. Remember that programming is a sequential step-by-step instructions. It's gonna read it line by line. Now let's read the first line and realize that one of these fields are not true. So it's going to show you select options at every time because this actually is a true statement. It's going to be showing you this problem because this is not true, this is not true, this is not true before thinking of the next line. Okay, as long as any of this, that's what it means. as long as any of these is not true. Now this man is actually true, but this one true, no. So it's going to tell you to select an option. So the problem or the solution to that is to bring this up. Check this first before you check for everything. Okay, check this first. Check the interest. Is it true? Yes or no? Then you check for the read only. Is it true? Yes or no? Check for the rate. Is it true? Before you now check for everything, then to put an option. That's just a simple thing. So what we're gonna do now is to remove this from here. So let's see if that will solve our problem before we move further to something else. Alright, here is our simple interest calculator. So let's put something here, 4, 6, 5 and whatever, then click on compute. Wow, please select an option. Okay, let's select the interest and then compute now. It's working. Okay, let's clean this too and then compute. Input fields cannot be empty. So we've got corrections of what we actually wanted. And let's move over to something else. Alright. Okay, the next thing we simply want to treat is this. Now that once you run this program, okay, these fields are open for users to probably key in any value. That means if I start this program, I run this program now, I can put values here even when I've not selected anything, but that's not actually good because a user can simply start typing something here and that's not important, that's not really good. So immediately this program is executed, all these fields is supposed to be rendered read-only. It is only when you click interest, then the fields that you're supposed to key in a value will open. So I think that's what we're going to do right now. We will need to come here, select the field, and then look for where you have read-only to true. When once you run the program, let it be read-only. The same thing is applicable to this. Render this true also. Render this true. Render this true. Now, what happens here is that when once you start the program, everything is going to be read-only. You cannot put a value until you select an option. If you click here, it's still going to ask you to select an option. So what you're going to do now is, if you are clicking interest, principal rate and times should be open for users to input a. From the coding environment, we go to where we had the interest. That's we go to have this very button. Now in here, immediately you click on it, render the interest read only. Of course, it was true initially, but at this very moment, at this very point in time, our txt principal dot read only is gonna become false. Alright, so let's see what happens when we run the program. Alright, here is our program. So let's see, we click on compute. Input fields cannot be empty. I'll explain that in a little time. It's just a little thing that we need to debug. Okay, now we click on interest. Okay, the three fields now are open. So you can now have 25, you can have 4, you can have a value here, and then you click compute. We have the result. Now if you clean something here, you have input fields cannot be empty. Okay, now the issue we had here was we did not click the input or the interest rather, but the compute button was telling us input fields cannot be empty. Now let's see how to run that problem. Let's see how to debug that issue. It's a very simple thing. Now that simply means that if you go to this where you have the button, let's go to where you have the button. Now the condition here was if your txt interest dot read only equal to true, then call the value of the interest. Okay, now because everything is rendered to be true, so it's gonna call on interest immediately you run the program. That's why you're seeing that input values cannot be true instead of select an option. So what you're gonna do right now is to repeat the same thing we are doing down here, but change some conditions. Now we will copy this. If txt now here is going to be equal to true, all right, It's not going to be or statement here, it's an and statement, because we're going to check if everything there is true. If this one is actually true, and then this one also is equal to true. Okay, if everything is equal to true, tell us that please use an option. So let's run the program and see what happens right now. Alright, here we are. Now let's click on compute. Please select an option. I hope you understand what you're trying to do here and the concept of this program. Please select an option. Okay, now if you select an option and then click compute, it's now going to change to input fields cannot be empty. Now it's only when you select an option that it can change to input fields are not empty, but if you use it the way it works without selecting an option, it's going to tell you that you must select an option. So let's now input. Okay, let's now input values. 20,000, our principal, 2.5, and then 2 years here we have our interest. So that was pretty cool. Now that's I think that's it all for interest. Now let's go into principal. Before then, let's try to take care of this, our return lock, return input lock. Remember that probably I want to calculate for interest. If I click again, everything is still there. Or let's say I want to change it to principal, everything I had here is still going to be there. So there is need for us to always clear this input once you something. So that's going to be a clear input lock. Let's write that code now. It's very simple. That one is very simple to implement. We go to our form design, go to the return input lock. Let's just write it out outside so we can call it private sub. Let's call this clear. Okay, so what are you going to do with clear? We're going to return everything to the way it was. So that means that your txt rate, your text is going to be empty. Okay, then we go to our body and then call clear. Okay, let's see how that works. Right. All right, so here we have the program back, and then we click on interest, please. Interest selected, and then we have 20,000. Please, no input fields should be empty. Let's have the next one. 30. Let's have the next one 2, and then compute. Have our interest here. Now, if you click on return lock, everything returns back to the way it was. All right. In my next video, we are going to see how to work on the principle. Thank you for having me. Ensure you subscribe to this channel for more opportunities, more programs, simple or complex programs coming your way. Thank you. Bye for now.